On July 7, 1944, a dying sergeant named Thomas Baker was propped against a tree on Saipan. He couldn't walk, couldn't be carried, and thousands of Japanese soldiers were charging down a hillside in the largest banzai charge of the Pacific War. His squad had to retreat through the dark, and there was nothing left to do for him. Someone placed a pistol in his hand, 8 rounds, all he had left. We'll return to that tree. Before that, it's crucial to understand the weapon they gave him. Every man who held this pistol faced the same stark reality. Not enough bullets, not enough time, and no other options. Consider October 1905 on the island of Samar in the Philippines. A prisoner, Antonio Caspi, tried to escape and attacked American soldiers. They shot him 4 times at close range with a .38 Colt revolver. 3 rounds pierced his chest and lungs, a 4th went through his hand into his forearm. Caspi kept fighting, finally stopped only when his skull was fractured by a rifle butt. This incident, documented by Colonel LaGarde, was a preview of what was happening 600 miles away. In the southern Philippines, Moro Juramentado warriors, after ritual purification and wrapping their limbs to slow blood loss, charged American positions with swords. The .38 caliber rounds passed through them without stopping them. A .38 bullet is .357 inches across, while a .45 is .451. Military bullets can't expand, so the hole is exactly the size of the bullet. That seemingly small difference, less than 1/10 of an inch, was often the difference between a man continuing to fight and a man dropping. General Wood's 1904 report was unequivocal. The .45 caliber revolver stops a man in his tracks. While many believe the M1911 was designed specifically to fight the Moros, it wasn't. The pistol didn't reach the Philippines until mid-1913, after the last major engagements. However, the Moro experience was instrumental in establishing the .45 caliber requirement, which in turn led to the cartridge and then the gun. In 1904, Colonel John Thompson and Major Louis A. LaGarde conducted tests at the Union stockyards in Chicago using live cattle, horses, and human cadavers with 7 different calibers. Their conclusion: a bullet which will have the shock effect and stopping power at short ranges necessary for a military pistol should have a caliber not less than .45. John Browning had been developing semi-automatic pistols for Colt since the 1890s. He scaled up his .38 ACP design to meet the .45 mandate, refining it over 6 years. In the final trial, his pistol fired 6,000 rounds against the Savage, which suffered 37 malfunctions. Browning's Colt had 0. It was adopted on March 29, 1911, at a cost of $14.25. Here's a detail that brings its origin full circle. Colonel Thompson, who oversaw those cattle tests, also chaired the board that approved the M1911. He later retired and invented the Thompson submachine gun, famously chambered in the same .45 ACP. Browning deliberately built the pistol with loose tolerances. Engineers disliked the rattle, but he wasn't creating a target pistol. He was building a weapon for conditions that didn't yet exist: mud, ice, blood, sand. These loose tolerances would prove to be life-saving, particularly in a place called Chosin. The army had its pistol, but its true purpose was yet to be revealed. On October 8, 1918, in the Argonne Forest, with fog in the ravines and machine gun fire echoing, Alvin York found himself in a desperate situation. A conscientious objector from the Tennessee mountains, he had tried twice to avoid combat. Now he was in a ravine with 7 survivors of a 17-man patrol, 6 Americans killed, 3 wounded. German Maxims swept the ground above, and a German officer with 5 men charged with fixed bayonets 25 yards away. York's Enfield rifle was almost empty. Growing up hunting wild turkeys in Pall Mall, Tennessee, York knew a trick. Shoot the rearmost bird first to prevent the others from scattering. He drew his M1911 and shot the last man. Working his way forward, 6 rounds, 6 men fell. The German commander surrendered. York and 7 Americans marched 132 prisoners back to Allied lines. His Medal of Honor citation doesn't mention the .45, but his diary and Private Percy Beardsley's affidavit confirm. I saw Corporal York fire his pistol repeatedly. I saw Germans who had been hit fall down. A pattern emerged, repeating for the next 60 years. This pistol wasn't part of the initial plan. It was for when all other plans had failed. In World War I, the M1911 was a backup for a failing rifle. In the next war, men would reach for it, knowing it was their last option. Back to Saipan, back to that tree. Baker had refused evacuation, choosing to die rather than risk another man's life carrying him out. They left him with the pistol and the only goodbye possible amid a banzai charge. His Medal of Honor citation reads, "When last seen alive, Sergeant Baker was propped against a tree, pistol in hand, calmly facing the foe. Later, his body was found in the same position, gun empty, with 8 Japanese soldiers dead before him." In the same battle, Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien fought with 2 Colt 45s until he died manning a machine gun. Both men received the Medal of Honor posthumously, a word that largely defined the M1911's role in World War II. At least 20 Medal of Honor actions involved this pistol. 12 of those 20 men, or 60%, were killed. Drawing a sidearm in such combat was not an offensive move. It was the ultimate last stand. The country produced 1.88 million M1911s for the war, with Remington Rand, a typewriter company, building 900,000. If you've ever held a 1911, you know its weight, 2.5 pounds loaded. That's what Baker held against that tree. A Marine Raider Battalion's after-action report from New Georgia in November 1943 perfectly summarized the M1911's wartime role. Held up very well, but used very little, almost never needed, completely reliable until it was the only thing left. Then came the bitter cold of Korea. At the Chosin Reservoir in November 1950, temperatures plummeted to 35 below zero. Steel burned skin on contact, and morphine froze in syrettes. Browning's loose tolerances, despised by engineers, became a lifesaver. Standard lubricants froze solid, locking bolt actions so severely that Marines resorted to urinating on them to thaw them. While the M1 carbine's reputation was shattered at Chosin, the M1911 endured. Soldiers stripped every drop of oil and ran it dry. Its sloppy fit allowed ice to pass through without seizing. General S.L.A. Marshall noted more instances of the service pistol being used with lethal effect in Korea than in all his World War II studies combined. Chinese forces excelled at night infiltration, often appearing inside American foxholes. At such close range, shouldering a rifle was impractical. The M1911 survived the ice of Chosin. Months later, in the muddy hills of June 1951, it was the last line of defense for PFC Jack Hansen of the 31st Infantry. With 4 wounded squad members who couldn't move quickly, Hansen volunteered to cover their withdrawal. He told them to go, staying at his gun. When the counterattack retook the hill the next morning, they found a machine gun with expended ammunition, an M1911 in his right hand with the slide locked back on an empty magazine, a machete in his left, and 22 enemy bodies in front of his foxhole. He had used every weapon he had until nothing was left. Slide locked back. That's how they often found it. Baker at Saipan, Hansen in Korea. The last round fired, the slide open, and the man behind it gone. The next arena for the M1911 was Vietnam, in tunnels so narrow you could touch the walls, filled with the scent of turned earth and something far worse. Hundreds of army tunnel rats volunteered for this duty. Under 5 feet 5 inches and slight of build, they navigated tunnels that were, at best, 3 feet wide. Red clay, hand-carved, sometimes dropping straight into second levels that stretched for miles. The air was thick with the taste of soil, sweat, and a chemical burn in the throat. There was no room to turn around. If you encountered an enemy, one of you would die facing forward, the other crawling backward in the dark. They went in with a flashlight, a knife, and a .45. Captain Herbert Thornton, who formed the first tunnel clearing teams in 1966, assessed their needs. He had to have an inquisitive mind, a lot of guts, and a lot of real moxie, because you could blow yourself out of there in a heartbeat. Underground, the M1911 was both power and punishment. A .45 round, fired in a clay tube barely wider than a man's shoulders, produced instant deafness and temporary blindness from muzzle flash. The National Museum of the Army notes, "The .45 caliber round was too loud and the muzzle flash too bright. 3 shots maximum before reloading. Any longer and the VC rushes you." Tunnel rat Harold Reeder put it simply, "I felt more fear than I've ever come close to feeling before or since. 3 shots, then silence, then only the sound of your own breathing and the chilling knowledge that whoever else was down there had heard every one. You couldn't see, you couldn't hear, the clay walls pressed in, and the .45 in your hand was the only reason you were still alive. That was the M1911 in Vietnam. Not a weapon you wanted to fire, but one you couldn't survive without." In 1985, after 74 years of service, the Army retired the M1911. 7 rounds of .45 were replaced by 15 rounds of 9mm, driven by NATO standardization. The frames being replaced were often 40 years old, the last ones built in 1945. The .45 didn't physically throw men backward. Physics doesn't work that way. If a bullet could knock a target down, the recoil would knock the shooter down too. What it did was make a hole 60% larger than a 9mm. In a world where military bullets can't expand, that was its crucial secret. That was enough. But the gun refused to die. Marine Force recon units hand-built pistols from gutted World War II frames. In 2012, Colt won a contract for 12,000 M45A1s, the first new military issue 1911s since 1945. Marines carried them until 2016, then switched to the Glock 19, not for performance, but for logistical reasons. 74 years, 55 Medal of Honor actions, 2.7 million built. A sergeant propped against a tree with 8 rounds. A pacifist in a forest shooting the backman first. A private in a frozen foxhole with a machete in his other hand. A volunteer underground with 3 rounds before the dark closed in. The M1911 was never designed to win a war. It was designed to keep one man alive for 10 more seconds when every calculation said he was already dead. Slide locked back, magazine empty. That's how they always found it.